Mario 2 USA being a reskin of another game and released internationally, the follow-up question we have to ask is why wasn't the real Super Mario Bros. 2 localized to international audiences? Going back to my Mario USA video, I went into detail about why exactly the game wasn't brought over. The simplest explanation was that the game was considered too difficult, and don't worry, in this video you'll see why I think this game deserves that reputation, and then some. Everything about this game, from the wind, the level design, and the difficulty, feels like this game was conceived in the lowest circle of hell, with the only purpose of causing pain and suffering to those who play it. But to stop being over dramatic, let's not waste any time and begin Super Mario Bros. 2 Lost Levels. So believe it or not, unlike traditional sequels, Lost Levels was never intended to be the follow-up to Super Mario Bros. It traces its origins to Versus Super Mario Bros., an arcade port of the original game released on the Versus system, an arcade system designed for competitive play between two players. However, what separates Versus from its console counterpart was that it was a more difficult version of Mario 1. According to Miyamoto, it was a common pastime for the developers to create harder levels in Versus Super Mario Bros. As a way of creating fun challenges, and eventually that idea led to the creation of Lost Levels. As we'll see later on, this game is the furthest definition of fun I've ever heard of, but it's good to know that even back then, Nintendo always had the concept design for Super Mario Maker. Now just to quickly go into specifics as to why Lost Levels wasn't localized, you'll remember in my Mario 2 USA video, I went over how during playtesting, Howard Phillips found the game too difficult, and recommended to Nintendo of America's upper management that the game shouldn't be localized. Eventually, that led to the American version of Mario 2, and the rest is history. After that, Lost Levels sat in perpetual limbo until the release of Super Mario All-Stars on the SNES in 1993. There, Americans and Europeans for the first time would experience Lost Levels and all the BS that came with it. Now just to clarify, I do think the All-Stars version is the best way to experience Lost Levels because it comes with the same features like the other All-Stars remakes. Only play the Famicom original if you're morbidly curious. But I'll end this section of the video by also mentioning Super Mario Bros. For Super Players, another remake released as part of Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. Don't play this version, it suffers from screen crunch and poor audio and should be avoided. So with that out of the way, let's find out why exactly I consider Lost Levels to be the worst Mario game. To start, not much has changed between both entries. Narratively, the plot is the exact same as the first game. Bowser has kidnapped Princess Toadstool and Mario will have to travel 8 worlds, ending in Bowser taking a lava bath like previously. Mechanically, Mario and Luigi still run, jump, and collect coins like they used to, and the game still uses the Excite Bike engine, which I'm glad was not changed, because gaining speed to make precision platforming is something you'll be doing a lot. For the first time at the title screen, you're allowed to pick between playing as Mario or Luigi. In my Mario 2 USA video, I made a minor gaffe when I said that Luigi in that game received his unique ice physics. I was wrong because Lost Levels would be its first appearance. And to be honest, Luigi in this game is like playing on legendary difficulty. His ice physics make the game more difficult than it needs to be. Unlike previously when getting a game over resulted in you returning to World 1, unless you use the Start A trick, Lost Levels presents you with a standard continue feature that returns you to the start of the world you got a game over in. Of course, because it is a sequel, Lost Levels does make a couple of noticeable changes. The graphics and art style of the backgrounds and tiles have been updated to display more detail, like how clouds and bushes have faces on them, and the ground tiles are now rocky. None of this affects the core gameplay, but I'll commend Lost Levels for going that extra mile to at least differentiate itself from its previous installment, because sequels can fall into the trap of being too similar to its previous installment and not innovating, or changing things way too much. Which I think is a good segue to a point I want to make. When it comes to sequels, whenever there's a successful first installment, developers often walk a tightrope in deciding on what comes next for the franchise. I call this sequel syndrome. When a franchise is young, it can experiment and try different things in order to attract a new audience. However, change too much, and fans get pissed. So that mentality has to be taken into consideration. Now the reality is that you can't please everyone, and I take the stance that franchises should evolve with the times they live in, but never forget what made them initially successful. It's similar to when games transitioned from 2D to 3D, in Mario's case when Super Mario 64 released. Sticking to Mario, Lost Levels is essentially neither one of these, because this game is a ROM hack before ROM hacks were a thing, which is also a good segue into discussing the terrible level design. Let me set the stage. When you come across your first set of item blocks, you'll hit them like you're used to, and then you notice a mushroom pop up and you think, wow, a new power-up. You get it, and then you're hit with the harsh reality. That new mushroom was actually poisonous. Lost Levels, off the bat, tells you that this is a game that plays dirty. And you know what? If this game cheats, I'm gonna cheat too. When you play this game, I highly recommend you do the 1-up trick. Thankfully, it's easy to perform thanks to the Koopa available at the start. The key is to grab the mushroom and then break the block so the Koopa is stuck on one block. Then you break the 2 blocks on top so Mario can keep jumping on the Koopa shell repeatedly, racking up extra lives. Now don't get too greedy, because if you excel 128 lives, the next time you lose a life will result in a game over. The technical explanation is that 8-bit machines like the Famicom can only record numbers between 0 and 9 in A to F. A to F acting as 10 to 15, meaning that the maximum number of lives you can have is 100. Exceeding that number will cause the game to register your lives in the negatives, thus resulting in a game over. You don't have to do the trick, but what the hell's the matter with you if you don't? The continue feature is great, but having extra lives makes the experience less rage-inducing. So to get into the nitty-gritty of lost levels, on the surface, it looks like nothing much has changed since the original Mario Bros. However, the journey to get there is much worse this time around. The amount of obstacles and leaps of faith you'll be performing makes this game seem like a sadistic ROM hack. Unlike in Mario 1, where I praised the game for its fun and challenging experience, Lost Levels on the other hand feels more like a kick to the stomach. Whenever I complete a level, there's never a sense of accomplishment. Instead, I think to myself, what's next? There's this one section at the beginning of World 4-3 where the platform you need to jump on is off screen, so your only choice is to make a leap of faith, except there's a floating Koopa you need to jump on to reach where you need to go, and it won't be the only time you do that. Leaps of faith are one of the worst sins you can commit when designing a platformer. Or how about an 8-1, when after making another leap of faith, there's a hammer bro ready to run you off the cliff. The enemy placement too is another huge problem I have with this game. By that I mean Lost Levels is not afraid to be very liberal in its use. Hammer Bros once again proved to be the bane of my existence, and new to Lost Levels is the Red Piranha Plant, where unlike their green counterpart, they won't wait for Mario. Instead, they'll come out when Mario's close to their pipe. A lot of the enemy placement is designed in a way where you need to be precise with your jumping, otherwise you'll fall down a bottomless pit. That design isn't fun. It's stupid. It's either get it right or lose a life. Now, I'm of the opinion that difficulty is never a bad thing in video games. There is such a thing as fun hard versus stupid hard, as I call it. You know those people that say games like Dark Souls need an easy mode because some of the levels or bosses are too difficult? I am of the opinion that those people need to go punch sand, because with some trial and error, you'll eventually overcome the challenge, giving the player a sense of accomplishment. Now, Mario and Dark Souls are completely different genres, however, difficulty is a conscious decision made by the developers. In my opinion, Lost Levels completely loses the plot as to what makes for a fun platformer. What makes platformers fun is their accessibility. Mario games have never been hard, even to this day. They've always managed to quickly establish the premise of the gameplay and send you off on your journey. For some reason, Lost Levels I guess just forgot about the fun part, because this game is shocker, not fun to play. Believe it or not, there are even more egregious examples Lost Levels uses. One of the worst mechanics I've ever seen in a platformer is introduced in 5-1, that being the wind. And the gimmick is that the strong winds will push Mario to the right off the screen. Your job is to use the wind to gain enough speed so Mario can reach platforms. He's otherwise unable to do so. And I know I keep beating a dead horse, but the precision required to make some of these jumps are ridiculous. The wind mechanic never once felt like it artificially complemented the level design. It felt like it was included to complicate the levels with a unique gimmick because for no reason, we have to make the levels even harder. There's a reason the wind hasn't made an appearance in other Mario titles. Now by this point in the video, you already have a clear picture of what I think of Lost Levels level design. The worlds are not fun nor challenging in a fair way, and things only get harder as you reach the end of the game. The ultimate example of this has to go to World 7. When you start World 7, off the bat, the wind mechanic rears its ugly head, and during my playthrough, I was moving so cautiously because I didn't want to encounter unexpected surprises. It only gets worse with the second stage because I forgot to mention earlier, in certain levels you'll need to travel down a certain pipe, otherwise the level will keep repeating itself. Thankfully, a good tip to keep in mind is that the pipe you need to head down is always the first one. Then in the next stage, the wind once again makes a return, except you now have to make sure Mario lands on the trampolines, which are situated on tiny platforms. Certain trampolines will shoot Mario high up in the sky, and they're pretty useful for avoiding sections of levels. But you also have to make sure you land safely because Mario's momentum is stiff to control in midair. On my practice playthrough, I lost many lives at this level because you can only assume where you're going to land. Now, castle levels once again make a return, but they're also not safe from Lost Levels' faults. Lost Levels, for some reason, loves placing the spinning fireballs in the most inconvenient places. World 7's castle has a section where you have to hug the corner to avoid taking damage. If you're Big Mario, you can avoid the fireballs by crouching in the corner, and Small Mario negates it altogether. However, some of the maze castles are more cryptic this time around because they're way more specific on which path you have to take. At the very least, taking out Bowser still remains the same. I know I've been ranting for a while about how bad the level design is, so I think I should mention what I like about Lost Levels. For one, the game still looks good. It's the same graphics as Mario 1, which I praised. Also, I like the added detail to backgrounds. What else? Oh, I like the soundtrack. Nothing's changed from Mario 1, and Lost Levels still has all the iconic scores. And that's about it. So with that finished, I think it's time we wrap this up. As for what I think about World 8, World 8's levels are less difficult than the previous World 7. However, don't think Lost Levels is going to start getting easy on you, because terrible level design is the philosophy of this game. Unfortunately, World 8's biggest mistake is that, like in Mario 1, there are no checkpoints to be found, which only exacerbates the problem when you have to perform more leaps of faith off screen and accompanying Hammer Bros ready to run you off the cliff. At the very least, World 8 2 is much shorter because it reuses the repeating level gimmick from previously, And remembering what I said earlier, the pathway you need to head down is always located at the beginning of the stage. Only this time, you have to head up a vine after an annoying wind section. Compared to 8-3 in Mario 1, Lost Levels, believe it or not, has what I think the easier version. Unlike previously, 8-3 doesn't feel like a gauntlet that requires you to play the game a certain way, which is a sigh of relief. Right before the trampoline, you can grab a Starman and use its invincibility to run through the remaining Hammer Bros and reach Bowser's castle. I know what I'm about to say might sound masochistic, but I actually like Bowser's castle in this game. Once again, it's another maze level, except this time the difficulty of the stage makes sense because it's the final level. And for a Mario level, Bowser's castle is really long. If you take your time with this stage, you run the risk of the time running out, which actually makes the level more fun. Near the end, you'll encounter a fake Bowser, just run past him, and eventually you'll reach the real Bowser. Then take him out like you always do, and you finally save a treasure chest. Actually, the treasure chest contains Princess Toadstool inside, and after rescuing her, there's this creepy sequence out of a creepypasta where the Toads gather around Mario and Peach. Either way, you're then sent back to the title screen with a star appearing in the logo. Now here's where things get funny. If for some reason you decide to beat Lost Levels 8 times, you'll have access to Worlds A through D, which offer even more difficult levels to complete. And by the end I said screw that, I want to go play Mario 3. To conclude, Lost Levels is not a game I recommend playing, even if you're somebody who's feeling nostalgic or if you're a huge Mario fan. The terrible level design and reckless challenge makes this game an unforgiving experience on a first playthrough. Now I know some people will say I'm too harsh on this game, because after all, Lost Levels was technically another game before it transitioned into a sequel to Super Mario Bros. But from what we got, it's almost shocking how this would be the same team that went on to make Mario 3 and Super Mario World. When comparing the sequels to Super Mario Bros., I have a difficult time deciding on which one I prefer. Technically, Lost Levels is the exact same as the original, however, its difficulty prevents me from returning to this game. And on the other hand, Mario 2 USA is a more competently designed game, but it has the legacy of being a reskin of another game. As for what I think is the better game, in all honesty, I like Mario USA more because playing that game is a much easier experience than Lost Levels. If you're going to play Lost Levels, play the SNES version. Don't bother with the Famicom original. So yeah, that's all I have to say about Lost Levels, a sequel I think misunderstood what made the original Super Mario Bros. Fun. The next time I return to Mario, it'll be Super Mario Bros. 3. So in the meantime, thank you for watching, and take care.